Hello and welcome to Dylan Carter's ePortfolio for Royal Roads University, EDLM 525. This is my ePortfolio, or as I like to call it, Reflections on Reflecting. We're going to start off with my philosophy of learning and leadership, specifically focusing on my teaching philosophy first. My philosophy of teaching centers around balance, and I feel that the act of teaching is really a balancing act. A teacher must constantly balance demands that pull them in opposite directions. These opposites may seem dichotomous at first, but seeking a dialectical approach has its advantages. Teachers must harness these opposites and find truth somewhere in between. Examples of concepts that require balance is a work-life balance, as demonstrated by my work website and a picture of my family. Other pairings requiring balance are formative and summative assessments. The practice and feedback components of formative is essential for success in summatives. Content versus skills is another thing that I look at in my class that I have to keep balanced. The content is very important, but if the students don't have the skill development to use that information, specifically source analysis and supporting arguments with evidence, the information becomes useless. Also, looking at new innovative techniques in the classroom is important to be on the cutting edge, but students also need exposure to traditional forms of instruction. If they're going to university, they're probably going to be lectured to, so that has to be brought in too. My philosophy around learning centers around the philosophy of this man, Kurt Hahn, who's a German educator, founded many organizations such as the Salem School in Germany, Gordonston School in Scotland, Outward Bound, Duke of Edinburgh Award, Round Square, the United World College Movement, and he was also one of the architects of the IB in its inception. At the heart of his philosophy is what he calls the 6 declines of youth and antidotes to these declines. So Hahn describes the decline of fitness, the decline of initiative, the decline of memory, skill, care, compassion in modern people. And he basically sets out that the antidote to these declines is fitness training, expeditions, projects, as well as service education. All of the schools and organizations have a focus on service education and outdoor education, and after working at the United World College, I have been witness to this philosophy in action, and the results are phenomenal. They've helped shape thoughtful, worldly, and caring leaders of tomorrow, for sure. Next up is looking at my leading philosophy, or philosophy of leadership. And I'm still in the midst of formulating this philosophy. But there are 2 attributes of a strong leader that I'm drawn to. A leader should be flexible and willing to change, as well. A leader is someone who should be able to inspire others to become leaders. For the first aspect, I'm reminded of Malcolm X. This was a black nationalist who, at first, into his foray of civil rights, was somebody who thought that violence would solve a lot of the issues at hand, and he wanted no assistance from white or European people. After his pilgrimage to Mecca, he expanded his viewpoints to include nonviolent means of change, as well as trying to cooperate with the white population. So I will have my own opinions of how things should be done as a leader, but I must be receptive to change. As I learn and grow as a leader, I must be able to evolve my techniques so that they can be applied to different contexts in different ways. The second aspect of leadership in terms of inspiring others is encapsulated by Paulo Freire. He's best known for his work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, as well as being one of the founders of critical pedagogy. And Freire endorses students' ability to think critically about their education situation. This way of thinking is thought by practitioners of critical pedagogy to allow them to recognize connections between their individual problems and experiences and the social contexts in which they are embedded. Freire believes that education should allow the oppressed to regain their sense of humanity in turn overcoming their condition. So basically he empowers his students to become, or to be able to recognize they are products of their environment, and they need to change this pedagogical approach if they're going to change their socio-economic position. And I too wish to inspire the educators that I work with to see the leadership potential within them by highlighting their strengths and providing leadership implementation opportunities. This will hopefully empower them to inspire them to foster their own leadership abilities. Next up, I'll be looking at leadership for learning. And here I'm focusing on frameworks as well as the change game. For frameworks, in our Leadership for Learning class, we're exposed to various frameworks as applied in various provincial settings. The two examples I utilized were from Ontario and Alberta. These are quite relevant to my personal experience. The school I work in is somewhat new, and being an independent school, we are not tied to any particular state or provincial standards. This gives us tremendous amount of leeway, but we also have to do the work of establishing these standards ourselves. The entire Ontario leadership documents presented in class will provide some exemplars for my school leadership to draw from, and I'm particularly interested in how various components within a leadership framework work together, as illustrated in the Ontario Guide. I'm also interested in bringing some of the concepts related to the indigenization of curriculum as presented in the Alberta Education Leadership Quality Standard document provided as well. These perspectives will add to the discussion of how to best implement leadership frameworks within our own school located in Panama as we try to incorporate local Indigenous ways of knowing into the curriculum. Also looked at the change game in this course, and I found that this was an excellent opportunity to put Michael Fullan's ideas of systems thinking into action. It was also a great example of what Vail calls motion leadership, where school leaders are agents of change. I found the change game to be a valuable learning tool. This presented very plausible situations in a rural school setting that we could all relate to in some capacity. By reading Vail and Fullan, I had been presented with ideas of how to become agents of change, and by applying systems-based thinking and motion leadership principles should lead to effective leadership. This game/simulation allowed me to put those theories into practice. There was an opportunity to see how change could be difficult at times, difficult for different people for different reasons, as well as using differing effective strategies to implement change. I personally learn best when given opportunities to practice my learning with no consequences first, and this simulation was a great example of this sort of learning because it simulates reality. It is not real, so failures in my first attempts had no real-world consequences. My team was able to run the simulation many times, where we were always tweaking our approaches in different ways to achieve different outcomes, and this allowed us to see more effective strategies and how they differed from less effective strategies. Looking at solving problems in different ways can lead to challenging my own assumptions about how people may behave in a certain situation. In the end, we were able to get some very positive results, as seen by this screen capture. We got all these people in the four column, except for these kind of sticklers. Up next, research for school improvement. And first, I looked at the Briggs text. My first foray into research for school improvement was trying to consume as much of the Briggs, Coleman, and Morrison text as possible. This was a daunting task, but crucial for success in this class as well as the program. The information found in this text is crucial to understanding research methodology in education. It was also a wake-up call that this was definitely a postgraduate program that I was in, and the level of language found in the text reflected it. Reading through the text was a great exercise in preparing me for this program, in that it forced me to recognize that my level of reading was going to have to be elevated, and my level of writing as well, and also to elevate it to levels I had never encountered before. I have also noticed that this was a finely crafted text in that specific authors presented their specialization in various chapters, and this brought a variety of perspectives forward within a single source. But a big part of this class was really about research literacy and specifically becoming a critical research consumer. This process was very daunting, yet still very much underway. A crucial component to this transformation was having an understanding of the various approaches to research and how they were informed by different paradigms. I chose a screenshot from the video that was shared in class to represent this process. Research literacy involves comprehension of a lot of different terms as well as conceptual understandings of numerous ideologies concerning how the world works. This philosophical look at research requires some breaking down if I am able to make any sense of it, and the video helped in this way as it attempted to simplify some of the more abstract ideas presented in critical research consumerism. I don't want to make it sound like I have all these concepts from interpretivism to positivism completely memorized, but I have a much clearer understanding of these terms, partially due to the assistance that the video had brought. Lastly, for this point is Mr. Datahead. I won't say much on this topic, but you know what they say. A picture of Brian in costume is worth 1,000 words. Just really a brief note on drama in the classroom. I think that the various skits that were on display during this class were crucial, whether it was Brian and Audrey reading off a script or our groups doing tableaus in front of the class. These non-traditional ways of sharing understanding brought levity to an otherwise dry topic that could seem unentertaining to some. Not me, of course, but maybe others. And finally, we're going to look at developing leadership capacity through reflective practice. Or what I like to say, reflections on reflecting on reflections. This class, all jokes aside, this class was really about self-discovery. For the most part, it was a very humbling process, and for that, I am very grateful. I was asked to take a couple different tests to categorize my personality as well as my teaching style. Some results were predictable, one example being that my teaching perspectives align with developmental perspectives, as seen here. I employ the inquiry method in my classes, and as Hee Soon Bai pointed out in an article on inquiry that we read, that the inquiry method aligns with the developmental perspective. Some results were not as predictable, like the fact that my personality test came back defining me as someone with little morality. This is going to give me something to reflect on for sure. Much of this class was designed to prepare for this assignment. I used these opportunities to build on ideas that you've actually seen on this portfolio. We were asked to reflect on ourselves as a person, as a learner, as a reflective beginner. We also had to reflect on ourselves as a teacher, educational leader, and as an agent of change. So you can see I've incorporated some of these elements from previous assignments into this final draft of this ePortfolio. I was also drawn to some of the readings in the class, particularly Fullen's description of the 7 leadership competencies. This provided me with some clear goals in terms of areas that I need to work on. Finally, looking at next steps, I hope I can build on this portfolio over the course of the entire program. I feel that I am not the best at reflecting, but I do see its value and I want to improve. Creating this portfolio forced me to review a slew of material that otherwise I may not have given a second thought to, and thus allowed me to gain much more out of these first 3 classes had I not created this portfolio. I'm currently thinking of ways to adapt this portfolios in which my staff could benefit from it, but I'm also considering sharing it with my students as an example of a reflective portfolio and perhaps something that they could engage in as a form of review. There's a lot of areas I need to grow in as a leader. Reading Fullen's description of the 7 leadership competencies definitely brought light to that. Moving forward as a student, I will also have to set some new goals regarding time management. With my school back in session last week, I found it incredibly difficult to set time aside that I needed to create this portfolio ahead of the due date. I know that this will be easier moving on with just focusing on one class, but that starting project early will always be a challenge. Thanks for listening, and take care.